So good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. We're going to have almost an hour of conversations and discussions about the Greenwood Arts Project and what's also known as the Tulsa Massacres and also referred to as the Black Wall Street in Tulsa. So number of different names at it, and we'll talk about all of them. And I want to thank you, my guests, Jerica Wortham from the Greenwood Arts Project, right? That's the kind of official title, Greenwood Arts Project. She's the manager of that project. And then Hannibal Johnson, a prolific author and activist and historian, and long paragraphs that I have to read in the announcement bio. Hopefully you guys get a chance to review everybody's bios and all the accomplishments that they've had. So I appreciate them spending their precious time with us. So we'll have a brief discussion about the past and then moving towards where we are now and also what's waiting us in the future. And then we'll focus on the actual art project. So that's the order that we're starting with. So everybody please mute your microphones if you're not actually participating in the discussion. And also this will be recorded and will be available for everybody to review after a few hours after we're done here. So I guess we can start with Hannibal, if you don't mind. Hannibal, there's, just with the number of books you've written about the subject, I think we can have hours, if not days, if not weeks of discussion about this. But like for me personally, when I came to Oklahoma 6 years ago, considering myself very, very well read from California Institute of the Arts, kind of like a highly respected institution, and coming here and realizing I've never heard of the Tulsa riots. I've never heard of Black Wall Street. And I was humbled to actually an announcement by the CalArts president, who actually went to school in Norman during the Black Lives Matter movement. He actually made an announcement that he was embarrassed to say that he did not know about the Tulsa riots, although he went to OU in Norman and now is there. So to kind of see the president of my alma mater apologize for not knowing made me feel better because but at the same time worse, that how could that be, that such important events are not at our access and especially in the academic institutions. So going back to when Oklahoma was not much and people were coming here to start new lives, how did Greenwood start and what was the initial impetus for this population of African Americans to gather here?
So Tulsa's historic Greenwood district began in 1906. There was a wealthy businessman named O.W. Gurley who had come to Oklahoma in the first land run in 1889. He came to Tulsa, he bought some land, he kept some land for himself, and he established a couple of businesses, including a grocery store and a rooming house. He sold other parcels to African Americans generally. And because African Americans were looking for opportunity and looking to escape political oppression in places like the Deep South, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, etc., this is a really attractive proposition. So after the establishment of that first business in 1906, Black businesses just proliferated. And Booker T. Washington is credited with giving the community the moniker Black Wall Street. But Black Wall Street is really a misnomer because Wall Street for many people suggests investment, financial capital, and such. The Greenwood community was much more like a Black Main Street in that these were sole proprietors, these were service providers. So there were beauty salons and barbershops and movie theaters, dance halls, pool halls, haberdasheries, furriers and pharmacies, grocery stores and restaurants, dry cleaners, all manner of small businesses that you might find in a community in this insular Black enclave separated from downtown by the Frisco tracks, just north of downtown. So this was a parcel that was coveted by wealthy oil and other interests, including railroad interests, but it was populated by the Black community, and that Black community became successful really out of necessity. If you're an economist, you might call this an economic detour in that Black people created their own enterprises in part because they were shut out of the Main Street economy. So that was the detour, the economic detour that created the community, and dollars circulated and recirculated in the community. Black people who worked outside the community brought their monies back into the community and helped the community financially. So that really is the beginning of Black Wall Street, the Greenwood District, the successful Black entrepreneurial community, budding downtown.
And then tell us a bit about what was happening around that area. You know, how from my understanding that just because how things were back then, unfortunately, there was a segregation kind of automatically dictated that, you know, if you were white, you live over here. If you're African American, you kind of belong there. And although they were aware of each other, and you know, they had trade going on, and they had commerce and arts and activities like that, but they did not kind of live within each other. There was this kind of understanding that that's how it should be. Am I correct on that? And how did that affect the relationships of these communities, like being right next to each other, but not being kind of encouraged to be interacting with each other?
Well, it's important to remember that what happened in the Greenwood District in Tulsa did not happen in a vacuum. It happened in a national context. The national context is one of racism, structural, systemic, institutional, however you want to call it. It's a really sort of deeply embedded system of racial restrictions. And I would even go further and say, when I use the word racism in this context, I'm really talking about anti-Blackness. So it's a very specific type of racism that puts Black people on the lowest rung of the ladder, socially, politically, and economically. So even if we look at the massacre, historically referred to as a race riot, that happened in a context. Just 2 years prior, the summer and fall of 1919 was known as Red Summer. James Weldon Johnson of NAACP called it Red Summer because red is a metaphorical reference to the blood that flowed in the streets from all this racial unrest. In 1919 alone, this comes on the heels of the end of World War I, there were more than 24 major events called race riots in the United States, in places that may seem unusual for you when you're thinking about it. But these events were happening in New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., Omaha, Elaine, Arkansas, Longview, Texas, Memphis, Tennessee. These things were happening all across the country. Historians and sociologists often refer to the first part of the 20th century in America as the nadir of race relations. Nadir is a word that means the low point of race relations. And that's because racism was systemic, structural, and institutional. So in a way, what happened in Tulsa in 1921 is almost a natural outgrowth of the systems that were in play during this period. And yes, you know, the communities were segregated. Communities were segregated all across the United States. One of the reasons for the friction between the communities was the relative prosperity of the African Americans. And if you subscribe to a white supremacist mindset, African Americans are, in many cases, even subhuman. In other words, if you're white and you're not faring well economically, and you can look across the tracks to the north and see these Black people who are only kind of partially people, if people at all, doing better than you, things are out of kilter. Something is out of whack, and the ship needs to be righted. So that really creates the foundation for something like the event that we call a massacre.
Wow, that's such a new picture, I guess, in my mind. Maybe kind of like historically, I think I've been aware of sporadic kind of events that are, you know, there's the news or articles, but to kind of think about that period of time being like that across the United States, almost then you could say, for lack of a better term, it may have been considered, oh, that's kind of, it's okay if that happens. It should happen. That kind of attitude then that existed there. There must have been interactions that went against this flow. That there were people saying like, let's learn from them, let's collaborate with them, whether they're individuals or business owners or people in the administration of the cities that were open to kind of being more human and appreciating everybody's humanness. Any presence of that, any specific aspects that you want to point to that there was a hope there even during even before the, of course before the riots, but that there was an existence that this mentality is not right, this what is happening is not right, from both sides.
Well, there are certainly examples of whites who had businesses in the Greenwood community. For example, the Zarrow family, prominent in Tulsa for decades, and philanthropical family. The Zarrows had a grocery store in the Greenwood community. There was another white business owner who had a theater in the Greenwood community. And the two principals who were the catalyst for the massacre itself, one's black, one's white. It involves possibly, according to the boy's mother, an interracial romantic relationship. Dick Rowland, black boy, 19 years old. Sarah Page, white girl, 17 years old. They have this incident in the elevator. Dick Rowland's mother would later say that they had a thing, you know, and we don't know that for sure. But if they did, that would have been taboo. And it certainly would have been the cause for a lynch mob together and so on and so forth, because this happened repeatedly throughout the United States. I also want to just mention, back to your prior point about how people thought of one another. After the massacre, we know that by just simply looking at the minutes of the Tulsa Chamber, looking at the minutes of the city commission, looking at what the mayor said at the time, Mayor Evans, all these folks really called what happened the result of a Negro uprising. In other words, those uppity Negroes over there, they don't know their place. And so, yeah, we're sorry that the damage was done, but guess what? They need to be checked because they're out of their place. And so that kind of dynamic, again, it's not uncommon throughout the United States during this period.
Mm-hmm. So I guess we can kind of go towards that point then. You know, the event of the massacre, I think the spark that, as you said, you know, was the excuse of having a white girl with a African-American boy. Maybe they had a problem, but that had, you know, you could go and solve that problem in the courts, you know, or can have a family gathering, community gathering. There's no reason to kind of, you know, burn down a whole district.
Well, I think, you know, one of the elements that we haven't talked about is the media, and we should always talk about the media. I mean, not just then, but now. So, what's the role of the media? Part of what happened in 1921 was we had an afternoon newspaper called the Tulsa Tribune that published a series of inflammatory and incendiary articles and editorials. And one thing that they did right after the incident on the elevator between Dick Rowland, the black boy, and Sarah Page, the white girl, was they ran an article the very next day captioned "Nab Negro for attacking girl in an elevator." Mm-hmm. And the article really it's a false narrative that says that this boy, Dick Rowland, tried to rape this girl, Sarah Page, in broad daylight in a public building downtown. Now, the article went out of its way to make Sarah Page, who had a questionable reputation at best, the article went out of its way to make her look virtuous, and as a corollary, to make him look villainous. Sarah Page would ultimately say that the infamous elevator incident was not something that she thought was intentional. She refused to cooperate with prosecutors when Dick Rowland was accused of assault. Unfortunately, by the time she got to the point of recanting her original story, the Tribune had published its version of events. And its version of events were believed by a lot of white folks in the community. And they took it upon themselves to exact justice against Dick Rowland.
Mm-hmm. So I think there's I mean, the unfortunate event of the actual massacre, I think the details are not as important of all these other elements that we'd love to talk about. Just knowing that the blood was shed needlessly, and left the whole district pretty much in ashes. From the photographs that I've seen, it's almost as a firestorm kind of went through a city. And of course, there are more unfortunate photographs of actual people kind of standing around while other people are in pain and maybe injured and maybe dead. If there's any aspect of that you'd like to point out, would like to hear, but I would love to move forward to what I'm really interested in, on kind of where we stand now in 2021, and considering everything that we're in, but the socio-political circumstances, and what we're doing now, and what is the importance of what happened and what we're doing now, and how are we moving towards our future. And that's a lot of sentences there. I'm going to let you address any aspect of that you wish.
Well, and just in terms of the devastation, just a few bullet points I think would be helpful. One is that in terms of lives lost, most people believe the range is somewhere between 100 and 300. Hundreds of more people were injured. We know that at least 1,250 homes in the Black community were destroyed. Businesses, churches, schools, and a library were destroyed as well. We know that some Black folks spent time in internment centers, very much like people of Japanese ancestry were interned during World War II. They were sent to these centers ostensibly for their own protection, but it really left the community defenseless. They had to have a green card, identification card, countersigned by a white person who would vouch for them to get them out of these internment centers. And we know that many Black families spent days, weeks, and months living in tent cities set up on the charred earth by the Red Cross. The Red Cross, by all indications, Black and white, did a great job in providing relief. What's really important about the whole narrative, though, is the triumph of the human spirit. So the story is not just the massacre. That's one chapter of the story, but you can't fully appreciate that unless you understand something about the people who built the community and their character. They built something that was called Black Wall Street, which is a really salutary term about their economic sophistication and prowess. Most of those people stayed put after the devastation, even though they were faced with new challenges from city leadership after the destruction of their community. They essentially said, "We shall not be moved." They rebuilt the community. It came back bigger and better than ever as a business community, peaking in the early to mid 1940s with well over 200 documented Black-owned and operated businesses. So we should know about the whole arc of this community and the people who made sure that that arc was sustained over time.
Considering the darkness that surrounded them after something like that would happen with your neighbors, with people who operate the city, with people who are currently living, let's say, across the river, that takes an amazing level of faith and belief to stay there and grow the community over again. It's an unbelievable testament to the power of it. I guess of humanity. We can be so good when we choose to be. Wow. Okay. So maybe I'm hoping mostly this story will affect students who do not know about this. Our younger generation, and some of them, they may kind of say, okay, this happened in the past, and it's definitely a bad thing that happened. But there are bad things that happen all the time. What would be the difference about this specific event for somebody who lives, we'll say, in the United States, if not specifically Midwest? What is the lessons to be learned, and what is it hope that we as humans, that we thirst knowledge, we consider ourselves kind of fair and above and beyond all other animals of creation. What should we learn from this, and what is the path forward from here onwards for all of us?
Yeah, I think one of the more obvious opportunities to learn has to do with something we've talked about before: systemic, structural, institutional racism. So it seems clear to me that systemic racism has yet to be dismantled. So some of the things we see playing out today are really analogs of what happened in 1921. And that's because we've not addressed the root cause of the problem, right? It is beyond absurd for some people who shall be nameless to focus on the so-called violence, the looting, and the rioting, and all that, which I think we all agree should not be happening. But you can't look at that without looking at the root cause of that. And the root cause is frustration over systems that are oppressive and have been oppressive for hundreds of years, and we have not addressed them. So that's really important. So we can look at incidents like what happened in Tulsa, which is a sort of patent example of racial hostility and oppression. Think about the lessons that we can glean from that and how we might apply those lessons and leverage them to take on the challenges that we face today: Black Lives Matter, mass incarceration, educational deficits, healthcare disparities, and on and on and on. So I often talk about a three-part process that we need to embrace to move us farther along the road to reconciliation. That process involves acknowledgement, which means confronting our history in an open, honest, transparent way. Apology, which means simply saying, I'm sorry, those things are horrible, those things are regrettable. And then probably the most important step is atonement. What do we do to repair the damage as best we can? What do we do to make amends? That's where conversations about reparations and other kinds of remedies come up. But acknowledgement, apology, and atonement. And that's not simply relevant to Tulsa. There are communities all across the United States that have suffered historical racial trauma. In fact, I challenge you to name me a community around the United States that isn't dealing with some sort of historical racial trauma, to the extent that there's more than one race in the community.
Yeah. When I lived in California most of my life, and there was the LA. These terms are, after being around the subject so long, the terms are really, it's almost, I don't want to really name them, but the LA riots. These are the terms that's that automatically kind of labels something as a kind of a bad, violent event, as opposed to kind of like actually open like what was happening and why it happened. And I questioned myself, like, what was happening? Like, why does happen? There's so much damage. Why? And obviously comes. I think anybody can assume that, so people must be unhappy. There's some level of frustration that people would do that. But what you mentioned there, this understanding that this has been going on for hundreds of years. There are structures in place that they're invisible. We don't see it. There's no building. There's no color, shape, line that will say like where this structure is. But it's a structure in place that's alive and well and dominates the operations of society. And that is the problem, and that is what needs to change. Some people may be unaware that they're existing and operating this system, and I think the vocabulary is important, the analysis is important, and application is important, as you mentioned. At OSU, in our art departments, and I think across OSU, we have different committees that are kind of coming together to think, with different titles, with that intention specifically, and on how do we disseminate this knowledge to our students, but also not just knowledge, kind of like a little package of information, but also apply it in how do we teach, how do we give assignments, how do we invite students to kind of participate in our university, how do we hire faculty, what is that process like? Because this invisible structure inequity exists everywhere. And it's not a process, unfortunately, of a month, of a semester, of a year, maybe not even a decade, you know. But it's, I would say, maybe I'll kind of, I'll say this and I kind of let you kind of close with this subject is, I feel somewhat empowered, you know, by us knowing this, by this kind of coming to fruition, at least at this time and place, at least in my career anyway, that there's something I can do. I can talk to my students. I can rethink how I teach, how I work, and look at my framework, my own institution's framework, and reconsider it from scratch, and on how things have been and how things should be and can be at the very least. So it's that sense of empowerment. It gives me excitement on what lies ahead. Yeah. So, any thoughts on that? And we can close that. The interview on that.
Yeah, based on what you just said about OSU and the things that OSU is doing to try to address some of these glaring disparities, I think another way to look at it that may be even more powerful is for not, I'm going to use OSU as an example, but for OSU to ask itself, what can we do to share power and privilege? If you think about that, that's a really powerful frame. So as you acknowledge what you have from an abundance mentality, and say, I recognize that everybody doesn't have this. How do I share it to make things more equitable?
Yeah, it'd be a beautiful line to share the advantages that we may not even think about that we have, right? Yeah. Well, that's a thought that can that can have a long kind of self and introspective for myself, at least I would say. But it's definitely a task at hand that can go along. So I appreciate that. And thank you for your time. There's lots more, but I almost want to say we want to come back to this and have like a weekly session on this conversation. I think it's definitely well deserved. We'll see what the future holds. But I'm going to switch now to Jerica Wortham, the manager of the Greenwood Arts District. I would love to maybe just kind of, if you can continue the narrative that as a result of where we are and what has happened, how the Greenwood Arts Project kind of came to fruition, what its objectives are, and what's happening kind of not too far away from us, maybe during spring, the Centennial that's coming up, and how can we engage with that? So I'm going to turn on the podium to you, Jerica.
Thank you so much, and thank you for this opportunity. And thank you, Hannibal, for giving all of that rich information. If you all do not know, Hannibal has literally written the book on Greenwood, and he's written more than one. I actually, so if you type in Hannibal Johnson on Amazon, you can see all of the works that he has created, resources that he has created to help you learn more about the history of Greenwood, the history of Black Wall Street, the evolution of such, how did it come to be? You can get deeper into that history. Hannibal, I know you're probably getting ready to sign off, but if they were to choose a single book to start with, which one would you suggest?
Great question.
I think Black Wall, if they're interested in this history, the specific history of Tulsa's Greenwood District, I would do Black Wall Street.
Black Wall Street, from riot to Renaissance?
Right. I thought I heard somebody say Acres of Aspiration is a book that's about, it's about the all-Black towns, but it includes a discussion of the Greenwood District. So it gives a fuller portrait of Oklahoma and Tulsa within the context of Oklahoma. So it sort of depends what the focus is.
Okay. Perfect.
Yeah, with the recorded link that will be on our website, I intend to put in a number of resources, including some resources that Hannibal told me about, the archives that exist in our libraries, and definitely I'll have a full listing of his books. But yes, indeed, there are wonderful ways to kind of have more insight onto the subject, for sure.
Perfect. Well, thank you all so much. So with that, Hannibal's done a great job of trying to giving you some of the framework of the Greenwood District, some of Tulsa's history. And so it brings us to today. The events that Hannibal was referring to as far as with the race massacre, that occurred on May 30th, 1921, went through to June 1st of 1921. And so we are entering the 100th anniversary of these events. And as such, there has been a commission created, which is the Tulsa Race Massacre Centennial Commission. And they have created an arts arm to the commission's work to help to elevate the story of Black Wall Street, to help to increase the knowledge surrounding the Greenwood history, the Black Wall Street history, the events that transpired here in Tulsa. And with that, applied for a public art grant. That public art grant awarded $1 million to allow for public art to enter the Tulsa district and to use that art to make the history of Greenwood known, to increase the foot traffic of people of color in the Greenwood district, which is a district that many are concerned with becoming completely gentrified, to be just completely transparent. So it's increasing that foot traffic, making the history known, seeing what we can do in our present day to increase the economic viability of people of color, to help to restore some of that spirit that is Black Wall Street. In doing so, we'll have a series of exhibitions here in Tulsa, which will range from theater to anthologies, to musical anthologies, to live concerts, to traditional art exhibits, from collages to fire sculptures. I mean, it is such a wide range of artistic forms that are going to be incorporated in telling this story. And while that was a selection process, and we had lots of beautiful, beautiful entries, we chose the ones that we'll go forward with for this particular round, but we still wanted to have room and space for everyone within the community to be able to participate in some way with the Greenwood Art Project. We are under the direction, our lead artists are Rick Lowe and William Cordova. And they're very, very interested in exploring the idea of social sculptures, which means what we do within the community is just as important as the work that is created. In fact, it is the creation of the work that in and of itself becomes the art form. And so one of the elements that we're going to include is a call and response poster project, which will include our request to various communities here in Oklahoma to respond to their budding knowledge of the 1921 race massacre, their knowledge and reflections regarding what Greenwood may have looked like, what its future could potentially look like, responding to just ultimately to the legacy of Greenwood, the legacy of Black Wall Street, reflections on the 1921 race massacre. And within those reflections, to create an 11 by 17 poster reflecting what your thoughts are on that particular history. You can do it as an educational piece, so it can be very literal as far as what comes to mind. It could be more abstract as far as what comes to mind. We've been receiving or complete, like all of the posters that we're receiving are also completely unique as far as how they're translating it artistically onto the paper. I say we have digital forms. We're accepting multiple methods of telling the story. The main thing is that it needs to be 11 by 17. If it's digital, 300 DPI. If it's made by hand, again, just 11 by 17. And we suggest a paperwork of of at least 60, but I mean, we'll take what we get. But we're just so very curious and excited to see how people interpret the legacy of Greenwood and what they would do artistically to tell the story. We'll have people in town from literally all over the world. As Hannibal indicated, I mean, the Red Summer was, it impacted America in a most dynamic way. And we find ourselves now in a space where America potentially runs the risk of these types of acts occurring again with the structures that are in place. Knowing that people will be in from all over the world to hear about and to learn about the history of Black Wall Street, to study what happened in this particular space and what can they take from that to go on into the world to make it a safer space, a more equitable space, a more harmonious space. What would you show them to help them to recognize what has occurred and or to help them to visualize what a future would look like? So, I mean, there's so many ways that you can interpret it, so many ways you can go with it. It could be literal, it could be figurative. But one of the interesting things is that every poster that is submitted will be displayed. There's not going to be a poster that is potentially turned away. And so, yes, we run the risk of potentially receiving some unsavory pieces, right? But then that still tells us what we're dealing with. That still shows us that there are still elements out there that are not ready, right, even after 100 years to potentially move forward. And so it is our hope that we are able to engage multiple generations. And so that's why you all participating is so very important, as you all are a generation that I think has a very good potential to get it, and to not only get it, but to do something with it. And so seeing your take on it is going to be absolutely positive, absolutely powerful. And so I really, really encourage you all to not only to submit a poster or 2 or 3. I mean, it's up to you, whatever you come up with. We're not gonna hold you to a single poster. But whatever you come up with, I also encourage you to inspire your network to create works as well. They don't have to necessarily even be in the arts department. We're receiving submissions from just the layman, just the regular citizen that's like, yo, I got some Crayolas and I have some markers and some colored pencils and I'm getting ready to make this happen. Or all I have is Microsoft Word, but I'm going to try to pitch something together. Our entries are so diverse, and the skill sets of those that are submitting the work is also diverse, but it's all necessary, right? So like everyone needs to be able to express themselves and to tell their story in their own way, to conceptualize it for themselves, and also to help others that are coming in to get the picture and to understand. So I really, really hope that you all will take the opportunity to engage in this process, and then also encourage others to participate. The deadline that we have is September 18th, so that's literally 16 days away, right? Sweet 16. So, and that correlates with our 918 day. So Tulsa is the 918 area code, right? So to participate and to coordinate with that 918 day, we are wanting to collect the posters. We have a very ambitious goal of collecting 300. It is our hope that we are even able to far surpass that. So if you all could help with that, that would be most helpful. If you have friends at other colleges and universities that would be interested, let them know as well. If you have family members that are just dope ass photographers and writers, and it doesn't even have to necessarily be photos. There are people that are submitting on their 11 by 17s poetry, quotes, words, just, I mean, where you can go with it is completely, I mean, I love you can give more, structure on his end as far as that.
I love the openness of the framework, because, and at first, this goes to say about my my restrictions in my mind that they need to open up that, well, correct posters need to be designed by graphic designers, but realizing that you're not after that, you're after an actual kind of reality of what does the local community, what does the human beings that are alive, all of them, whatever education they have, whatever tools they have, what do they think about this space, this meaning, this existence, and almost like some ways like a pulse check almost, but it's a visual pulse check, and to me, and it's so it's such a great approach to be so transparent. It is. I kind of sometimes need to maybe oh my God, what are we going to get? But for you to be so open to that, for the actual whatever the reality is, we're open to it, we want to hear it. That's amazing, and empowering. I can't think of too many other projects that have open doors, that anything you send will be shown about such an important subject, and allow the community to actually kind of just come forward and say what you need to say, however you want to say it. So it's very unique, and I think it's a perfect approach to the subject and where we are at. I think I, for one, will definitely encourage my students. I'm going to be making artwork myself. I know some of my colleagues have already made work. I know Professor Mendes has already sent you work, and he's a great poster designer. Anyway, he couldn't wait to get his hands on that. So yes, you definitely receive work from us, and we'll disseminate the information to everybody else. And this conversation will also be recorded, as I said before, for if people want to have more information about that, because again, people who don't know may need to soak themselves a little bit, at least, in the subject before they can respond. And hopefully that will open the door for a longer period of engagement, more responses. And as I said before, I live in Tulsa, and everybody else does. Would love people to actually come here and visit and participate in the events when they occur from next year onward. So kind of, I'm going to provide links in our recording and resources for students and everybody else who wants to know more about it. For the OSU posters, there's going to be a link. And anybody who's not from OSU, they can send them directly to your email, right? And that will also be provided there. You want to kind of give just a quick note on when will these events start happening, and kind of we can kind of close it up with that.
Excellent. So as far as the art project, the artists are currently creating their work. The exhibitions will begin as early as January, COVID pending, of course, but as early as January, we'll have films that will be on display with public talks surrounding the film that will be viewed. There are albums coming out as early as February, anthologies as well. The plays in March, concerts in April. Bulk of the work will occur primarily in May and June. We have some pieces that will also come out in July, but May and June are going to be the focal months primarily. Most of the people will have their art and their works on display beginning March 1st through around July 15th is when you can see the bulk of it. If you are just going to plan a single weekend to come, it would definitely be the Centennial weekend, as that weekend will have art displays and pop-ups all throughout the community.
Okay, so
as well. So if you're people that move away and will not be in Tulsa during that time period, there are several online ways that you will be able to engage as well. We have a digital app that's being created, as well as a Chamber of Commerce online for the historic businesses that were present during that time, to try to get more understanding regarding the businesses that were in place, and to really just humanize them. Like, it's not just X number of businesses that were destroyed. These were real people with real families, with real history, with real services that they provided to their community, and just a deeper understanding of that.
because I think that you know, I can't wait to go to real human events. You know, no matter how far I am, I'm going to find ways to do that. Hopefully, of course, when it's safe to do that. Okay, so if there's any questions from the audience, you guys can kind of type it in the chat, in the kind of the chat box here. You guys can just click on the chat button and just type in a question, and I'll read those. I did have a kind of few other questions when I was talking to others about this. Is there a reason that you did not kind of say something along the lines of the poster should communicate, you know, Tulsa's future, or should communicate the hope for Greenwood, or should communicate an anti-racist message for Oklahoma? You know, you just say, like, you know, it's open expression. Is there any reason behind that?
Mainly, we wanted to speak to the legacy of Greenwood, the legacy of Black Wall Street, and ultimately all of it is going to speak to it. So as long as it's along the themes of Greenwood, of Black Wall Street, of the race massacre, whatever is submitted to us is still going to help conceptualize it. It's all open to display. So I think about some of the artwork that I received from children. It was a little boy helping another little boy up, and it was like, just love deeply, because love covers a multitude of sin. And so that's his interpretation. And so while it doesn't necessarily speak to Greenwood 1921, it is still a topic that is related to what events transpired. What does loving deeply mean in reference to 1921? How can that particular love cover a multitude of sins? And then we think about when Hannibal talks about what steps need to be taken to really truly move forward, you know, like how much covering is okay, like when is there apology, when is there atonement, when is there, you know, so it all feeds into the discussions that are necessary to happen for true growth and development within our community, and to truly be able to move forward and go into Greenwood's next positive era.
So not only the media is open, crayon, writing, photography, handmade, collage, digital, but also what is being said is open. You know, there could be any related, as far as our imagination, we can relate the visuals to the themes that we talked about. It's okay. It could be about the past, about the future, about the present. Sounds great.
And we're talking about the legacy. So I mean, it's still things that are related to that legacy. But yes, it's open for interpretation completely.
Great.
And now I will say that it is easier for us to process the digital forms. We still need variety. We still need visually. We still need different textures and depths to help make it interesting, of course. But
I look forward to being part of the curatorial committee that will decide on how to display these, because just to having this kind of the spectrum, you know, from the simpler, the handmade, to the, you know, the poetic, to the abstract, to the digital, to be more photographic, more graphic, I think it will kind of create almost as interesting of a spectrum that maybe our community kind of holds, you know. I definitely look forward to that. So I have one maybe more technical question. So Noah's asking, will the digital submissions be shown on screen, or would they be printed?
They will be printed. They will be printed and matted to whatever the space is that they will be created in. We are looking at exploring the ideas of potentially having some of them projected onto different spaces around Tulsa. Periodically, we're also having a billboard campaign, so that's a possibility as well. But at this time, our main thing is we will be printing off the digital posters that are submitted to us and displaying them.
So students don't need to print them, obviously, they just need to send the digital forms, and then you will take care of the printing.
Yes, they will not need to print them. We will take care of printing closer to building the exhibit.
And depending on how things go, based on previous conversations we had, maybe there'll also be, in addition to prints, there'll be projections on different surfaces, which would be amazing.
Yes, and to sweeten the pot, there has been an award created. So there is a judge coming in to look at the pieces that are created, and there is a cash prize attached to the ones that they deem first, second, or third place, starting at $1,000.
Participate in a unique, once in a lifetime perhaps event. Participate in your community, have your work be seen, and get paid. that's
potentially.
That's the hard combination to beat. So Mickey's asking, maybe let's see, where should we have the hand-created posters sent?
We have just recently adjusted the location, so you can send the hand-printed posters to Silhouette, Sneakers and Art, and I can get you their address, or I can make sure I send it to you to share in the resources. We'll get you that mailing address.
So I'll have that information added to our in the website. I'm glad Mickey is one of our graduate students. She's saying she wants to have her nieces involved. So
I love that. Thank you so much.
That's wonderful.
I love it.
Hannibal, is there anything else you want to add to all of this before we close it down for this session?
Can't really think of anything. I just encourage folk to immerse themselves in this rich history. It's a unique opportunity. Think about what you can glean from the history that you can apply to the present, and exercise your agency and your power in the space in which you find yourself.
Wonderful. You didn't copyright that, did you? Because that's the one I want to use it somewhere. So you have such beautiful way with words, of course, and reading some of your articles, and it's wonderful. Well, thank you again for everybody. Thank you, Jerica. Thank you, Hannibal. Thank you, all our audience. So please tell everybody else about this important event that's happening, and I'll share the links, and you can share the links outside. And look forward to, at the very least, seeing everybody's artwork, if not actually having more interactions on the subject. I'm definitely very excited and looking forward to it.
Excellent.
Okay. All right, well, we can close down the meeting then. Thank you again.
All right, thank you so much for this opportunity. You all have a wonderful day.
All right, bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.